The problem we're going to be dealing with here is the problem of conditionals. And the main difficulty is the use of would and what it exactly means in conditional sentences. So what is a conditional? The most common form of a conditional is the if-then sentence. If I had $1 million, I would buy a Ferrari. If you want to pass your exam, you need to study. Very simple. The if clause states the conditions or what needs to happen so that what is expressed in the main clause can happen. And there are two basic types of conditionals. There's the real conditional and there's the hypothetical conditional. So the real conditional, if you want to pass your exam, you need to study. And in this conditional, the speaker, me, views that conditional as being most probable or most likely to be fulfilled, etc. So in this type of conditional, let's envision the situation. So let's say a student is sitting in front of my class, a student is sitting in my class, and it's a remedial class, and the student has failed their exam. And I say to the student, listen, if you want to pass your exam, and you're here in this class because you want to pass your exam, if you weren't in this class, you probably wouldn't want to pass your exam, but you're here, you want to pass your exam, so I say to the student, if you want to pass your exam, you need to study. So for me, the speaker, there's an intimate connection between these two things, and I view this conditional as being real, as being probable, as being most likely to happen. The second conditional, if I had $1 million, I would buy a Ferrari. Why is it called a hypothetical conditional? Because it's a conditional that is contrary to reality. I do not have $1 million. But let's say tomorrow I wake up and I'm walking out of my house and I see a bag of money, right? And I open it up and there's, oh my God, $1 million in there. And I say, wow, you know what? Now I'm going to go buy a Ferrari. But obviously the chances of that happening are slim to none. And working at the University of Kassel, I must say, you do not have enough money to buy a Ferrari. So if I had $1 million, I would buy a Ferrari, but I don't have $1 million. And it's most likely not going to happen that I'm going to get $1 million anytime soon. That's why it's something called hypothetical. Now, hypothetical conditionals, we have a couple of different patterns. Pattern 1, if I had $1 million, I would buy a Ferrari. If you slept 8 hours each night, you wouldn't be so tired. Obviously, I don't have $1 million, and in the second conditional, no, you didn't sleep 8 hours each night. But if you did, you would not be so tired. And the pattern is if plus the past, would. Pattern 2 is something that is in the past and is contrary to what actually happened. If you had worked harder, you would have passed the exam. If I had scored the goal, we would have won the game, right? The second sentence is sort of a typical kind of, if you guys, I'm sure you guys watch soccer or football, and afterwards, they have these interviews with these football players, and they ask them, so what do you think about the game? And the guy goes, well, if I'd scored the goal, we would have won the game. Yes, of course, right? I mean, but the guy didn't score the goal, and therefore they didn't win the game, right? It's something that is contrary to what actually happened because it's in the past. And the pattern there is if plus past perfect. In the if, or the past perfect is in the if, and the would have is in the main clause. Pattern 3 is something that happened in the past, but the situation is ongoing in the present. If I'd worked harder at French in school, I would speak better French now. So obviously, if I'd worked harder at French in school, is a situation in the past. I'm no longer in school. If I'd worked harder back then, maybe when I was a teenager in school, I would speak better French now. And all of those 3 patterns are hypothetical conditionals. And what you see here, and this is something that a lot of people have a problem with, is that there's no would in the if clause. So people think, well, but I've heard about that. I mean, I've heard people using these kinds of conditionals, would in the if clauses. Well, the would in the if clause is considered colloquial English. So therefore, you need to be very careful when you start to use would in an if clause. It's not something that I would write. If you're in a bar with your friends, you're hanging out in the USA, you can use that. If you're writing, your essay or you're writing a term paper, etc., no would in the if clause. It's if plus past, right? If plus past perfect. Those are the 2 things you can put in the would clause to express put in the if clause to express a hypothetical conditional. However, we don't just have these conditional sentences with if and then, we have a conditional situation. So let's take a look at this introductory paragraph. Right? So obviously the introductory paragraph, every year thousands of young people take out loans as they need money to start their adult life. Without proper education on personal finance, many find themselves in serious debt for years and years. In order to help them succeed financially, it is important to educate them. The best way to do this is to require that every high school student take a personal finance class before graduation. Now, why is this a conditional situation? First, does every high school student currently have to take a personal finance class before graduation? No. So when you're writing, let's say, your persuasive essay, and this is your introductory paragraph, you will be arguing in your essay for the benefits of a personal finance class. So you're arguing for a conditional situation. What would happen, what could happen if students were required to take a personal finance class. Now there's two ways of doing this. If high school students are required to take a personal finance class, they will manage their money better. And the will here is a more likely, it's a real conditional, a more likely or a more probable. If high school students were required to take a personal finance class, they would manage their money better. It's more hypothetical, it's more wishful thinking, it's possible. I mean, in a case like this, I would say, the second type of conditional would be a little more tentative, a little more uncertain than the first. It's more hypothetical, right, versus the first conditional, which is more likely, more probable. But in essence, you're arguing essentially for the same thing, right? It's a conditional situation that if something were to occur, right, the conditions, what would happen with students taking a personal finance class. So take a look at this over here. This could be a first body paragraph. A personal finance course would teach young people how to manage their income and expenditures. Many of them need expensive items like cars to go to work. A personal finance class would show them how they can pay off these items as quickly as possible, yet still have enough to live. With education on how to manage their finances so that they are not in debt for years and years, young people will have the ability to purchase needed items like cars and homes with skill and confidence. And the would and the will here are necessary because you're arguing for a conditional situation. And a lot of times people would say, for example, the last sentence, with education on how to manage their finances so they are not in debt for years and years, young people have the ability to purchase needed items. And that have there is incorrect. You need that will. Why? Because it's a conditional situation. Right? And the same thing with the would here in the two previous sentences. It's a conditional situation. Another body paragraph. A personal finance course would also be good for the economy as a whole. An economy needs young people to buy things and pay taxes. If they spend most of their life paying off their very high debts, they will not have enough money to spend on other things. A personal finance course would prevent them from getting into this situation in the first place. Therefore, the economy will benefit as young people will have more money to spend. Right? And here you need the would and the wills. Right? It doesn't work any other way. So you have to think when you're arguing for something, like for example in this essay you're arguing why a personal finance class would be beneficial or is good for students. You have to think, am I arguing, let's say, for a conditional situation? And this is something that a lot of students make tense mistakes on.